Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Charter Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Delegate Cliff Hayes with us. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning, sir.
And Delegate Chris Jones, good to see you.
Good morning.
Now, you're both members of the Appropriations Committee. You're the chair, and I know that you're on two subcommittees of substance as well. So let's start off talking about what's going on with the budget, Mr. Chairman.
Today's budget day. It's on the floor, crossover week, in a short session. They both come at the same time. So we'll have the amendments to House Bill 1700, which is Chapter 2, the existing budget, on the floor today. Probably spend, 2 or 3 hours, I guess, going through all the amendments, and then we'll get it passed out of the chamber down to the Senate, and we've already started doing a side-by-side of the Senate budget compared to the House budget. And next Wednesday, we'll get it in conference, and then we'll get to work on reconciling our differences and get out of here on time on the 23rd of February.
Great. And I know you serve on two subcommittees, Capital Outlay and I believe Higher Education. Talk to us about some of the work you've been involved in on those subcommittees and the full committee.
Well, we know that on Capital Outlay, we're talking about the construction for major capital projects across the Commonwealth, and so there's transportation, infrastructure needs, whether it's the port or major roadways, bridges, interstates, etc. Happens to direct funding towards those major projects. Higher Education is another subcommittee that I serve on, talking about our colleges and universities and many of the needs that are there. I think our market and our economy, major companies and corporations have pretty much sounded off pretty loudly about what they would like to see in the way of filling the jobs that are demanded, that they have available here in the Commonwealth. And so we're trying to do all we can in the way of funding initiatives that will help prepare a workforce for the economy that's actually demanding high-skill technical skills and trade.
Great. And let's talk a little bit more about the Port of Virginia. I understand there was a presentation yesterday regarding the investments that have been made over the last few years. Talk to us about the importance of those investments.
Well, in the last 4 years, we've put about $700 million into the port. $350 million was for densification at NIT, improving the gate. The 564 has been improved, and that is greatly increasing efficiency of getting in and out of the port itself. They've rebuilt some of the stacks at NIT. Virginia International Gateway, which is in Portsmouth. That is, we're going to be able to have 2 huge ships at one time. And the presentation yesterday was I would call it impressive.
To say the least.
To say the least. And they are moving. They've been able to reduce the time when the box is taken off a ship onto a chassis and out the gate. And we put about $350 million into the deepening and the widening of the port. And if things go as we hope, the shutdown has kind of slowed down a little bit of the communication back and forth with Washington. This time next year, in January, February, there should be a dredge out in Thimble Shoals starting to take us to 55 feet. We will widen it by 400 feet, I believe, which will allow for 2 ships to pass simultaneously. Because right now we're having, I think, 4-hour shutdowns on occasion. We'll go to 5 when you have to take a Navy ship out and a big ship that's coming in. So we're positioned very nicely. John Reinhardt's done an outstanding job, he and his team. And I think 1 out of 8 or 1 out of 9 jobs and
Right here.
Commonwealth are affected. They had a wonderful chart of new businesses in the last, 3 or 4 years, and
That's
you can see
right.
the 81 corridor. All the new businesses coming down there because we have Front Royal. They're doing the inland port. They're doing some at-grade crossing work there to improve that in and out. And the Port of Richmond signed a 40-year lease, I believe about a year and a half ago, and major investments are being made there.
So those investments are important because we're in competition with New York, Charleston, Savannah, Jacksonville, I believe, as well.
Absolutely, and as you've talked about the improvements to the Panama Canal, all of the goods and merchandise that is trying to make its way to the U.S. Economy, if you will, we want to be that entree, if you will, that entry point where all can depend on getting that merchandise into land via sea and then out via rail across the Midwest and beyond.
And the chairman mentioned Interstate 81. There's been a lot of talk about the need to improve traffic on Interstate 81. Some people refer to it as a truck farm because there's so much commercial traffic by way of trucking there. And I know that's been the subject of discussions in terms of funding, that type of initiative. I'm sure you've discussed that on the Appropriations Committee. Talk to us about that issue as well.
Well, I know for a long time we've been talking about 81 and other interstate highways with the trucks and so forth, and it brings a lot of angst in many ways, but at the same time, we know that it's necessary for our economy to flourish. For example, in Chesapeake, we have now Dollar Tree's headquarters located there, and we know the needs of getting those goods to the shelves. So it's a necessary, if you will, to make sure that we invest there so that it'll pay off and we leverage that investment on 81, that later on all of those goods, all of those trucks that are coming through there is just simply getting the goods to the shelves in our stores all across the Commonwealth.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, but I understand that that's going to a study commission now, especially on the funding issue, because everyone agrees there's a problem. The question is, how do you fix it fiscally in a responsible manner?
I had hoped we would have done that this session. I felt we needed to. A statistic we saw, I think, the other week in appropriations was 14% of the traffic on our interstates is stopped due to accidents. I think it's 51% in that corridor of 81. And truck traffic is a majority of the traffic you see on that corridor. It's really our, I guess, our main street for business. And it's 300 plus, I think, 370 miles. So it's a long stretch of highway. And I'm glad to see at least we're going to move forward with a study to come back with some idea how to approach it. The problem we got is declining, gas tax collections are a declining source. With the auto manufacturers saying, I think Volvo said there'll be a third all electric by 2025, and other manufacturers are doing the same thing. We did it 6 years ago in Hampton Roads on the when we did the Speaker's bill, Speaker Howell at the time, 2313, and investing in transportation. If you look at Hampton Roads now with high-rise bridge, there's a crane out there driving pylons. You've got bid coming in soon, technical approaches to the HRBT. So we're very fortunate in Hampton Roads that we made that decision 6 years ago, and now the same thing needs to happen on 81.
Now, in terms of tolls in your district and in the Hampton Roads area, is that still an issue of concern among your constituents?
It remains a concern, particularly on the downtown, midtown tunnel area. More specifically, I guess, dealing with the downtown tunnel, a lot of pushback, I guess, or there's a lot of folks talking about the tolls that go from downtown leading into the city of Portsmouth. So I guess the Portsmouth folks are more focused on that issue more than anyone else. It happens to be an issue, I guess, across Hampton Roads as we move from downtown to the Jordan Bridge to the Dominion Boulevard Bridge to perhaps the high rise. But the truth is we have to figure out a way to construct and improve our roadways, and a lot of these things, these projects have been, on the planning sheets for a long time. I can't even think about how far The Dominion Boulevard Bridge has gone back many decades ago, 30, 40 years or more, when it was dubbed the Norfolk to Raleigh Connector. And finally we're at a place where on the Chesapeake side of the line we've been able to do those improvements to the Dominion Boulevard Bridge and all of 17 leading up to North Carolina. And I think that is going to be, I think, one of the next areas that's going to really boom, if you will, when it comes to revenue, economy, a lot of energy and activity in that whole corridor. So the good thing is that we have kind of laid the infrastructure and prepared the roadways so that the rest can kind of build up in and around that area along the Dominion Boulevard corridor leading up to the North Carolina line.
And Delegate Jones, in your opinion, how has SMART scale, the objective criteria to determine funding in different parts of the state, worked out?
It's worked out better than we had hoped. We took out the political aspect of it when SMART scale was done. It was House Bill 2 at the time, back in I think 2014, first year of the McAuliffe administration. Delegate Stolley carried that bill. And every other year, 1 year you do new construction, and 1 year you're doing like maintenance, etc. So we just were allocated $200 million in SMART scale initially through the approval process, CTB, to be approved hopefully in June for the HRBT. And what that means is every project that's in the 6-year plan will be fully constrained, which means you have money in there to pay for it. Because to Cliff's point, back in the day, you'd have a 6-year plan that had many projects sprinkled across it, but were not fully funded. You might get some for design, right-of-way acquisition. Now, if it's in the plan, 6-year plan, it is fully funded and will be built or proceed along in its normal progress in that 6-year period.
And strategically, that was probably one of the best things that we could have done.
And I would agree. Yeah, I totally would agree with that.
With all in the region kind of coming together, and there's nothing actually legally forcing all of the localities to work together. And so I guess in Hampton Roads in the past, this notion of trying to kind of slice the pie up equally when it came to transportation made people feel good, but then again, accomplishing not a whole lot of anything. As you know, just traveling across a region, I mean, it takes the cooperation, the collaboration of the different municipalities, because when you're traveling through Hampton Roads, you need to go from Suffolk to Virginia Beach. You're going to cross Chesapeake, perhaps Norfolk or Portsmouth in order to do so. And so the major arteries that are coming and traversing our region need to be planned out in a strategic fashion. And so when we started ranking those major transportation arteries and networks that needed to make sure or rank them in terms of priority, we were able to start direct funding towards what was best in the best interest of the region, as opposed to just trying to equally divide the revenue.
Well, it sounds like Go Virginia has had a great impact then.
Go Virginia has, and of course we established HRTAC, which is the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, and that has really been instructive to us, to Cliff's point, of prioritizing those projects. We've got Segment 1 and Segment 2 on the peninsula. Segment 2 will be done, I believe, in the next 6 months. And Segment 3 is moving along, high-rise bridge, HRBT, intersection of 64 and 264 going to the beach from Norfolk and Chesapeake. So that's going to pay, those projects will pay dividends for us for many, many years in Hampton Roads, because we're a cul-de-sac. But Go Virginia has certainly helped the region as well. I think HRTAC was a precursor in working together, because you had to figure out what needed to be done. And with economic development now in Go Virginia, what I've heard, I think in 6 clusters, the regional economic development authorities and the cities have all agreed they're not going to compete with each other in that space and try to work as one to bring them to Hampton Roads, which is huge.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. Now, in terms of teachers and increase in their salaries, I think everybody has agreed, and apparently there will be a very significant teacher raise, but that also puts pressure on some school districts that are not as affluent as others to come up with that match. How is appropriations dealing with that issue?
Well, I think in the governor's budget there was much of that requirement in place, but the appropriations in the House version may not necessarily have as much of a match in order to have those funds. And so I think the teachers, those in the classroom, can be rest assured that coming out of the 3 different budgets that are coming together eventually for conferees to come together, that'll be a piece that won't necessarily have to be haggled over too much, because we're going to have to, I mean, it's in the House budget as well as what's been proposed as well. So
now there's a way that
and to that point, the governor would have required 5% match. It was an all or nothing. We had a 3% raise going into effect July 1st of this year. He added 2 on top of that with the same exact language. What the House has done, we left the 3% in, and we pushed the 2% back until December to give those jurisdictions an opportunity, if they wanted to get to 5%, to get to 5%. And more importantly, to Cliff's point, we actually changed the language and said, if you get up to 3 or up to 2, you'll be able to, quote unquote, have that matched. You won't have to go to 5 to get any money. And we did as well. We've done it the last 3 years. We continue to add more to the lottery. Going back to localities, we did 45% in our budget. It's 40% now. And they have no strings attached. There's no match requirement. And that gives much more flexibility to the school divisions to be able to do what they need to do. Because, I mean, you know, from being on city council, locally you have a better idea of what needs to be done than we do here in Richmond. So we thought that was a really good compromise. It's worked well in the last 2 or 3 years, and we want to continue more of that.
And I think you're also addressing issues around pupil-teacher ratios, counselors, school nurses, and psychologists as well.
I think for some time now that has been a major issue as we look to the counselors in our schools and look, I guess, more closely over this past year, whether the Select Committee on School Safety, the Safe Virginia Initiative, all of the initiatives over this past year sat down across the Commonwealth, and we sat down and listened to what it was that the citizens wanted, what the school systems wanted. And all of the stakeholders coming together, out of all of that, we all understood one thing about the school counselors is that in many cases they were performing other functions other than what they were actually hired to do. Proctoring tests, in the classrooms, as opposed to carrying out the function for which they were hired. The other thing is those ratios. I mean, one school counselor at the elementary level to 400 or so, 500 students was just, unrealistic, to say the least. And so now, by putting more money towards that effort to try to make those ratios better, I think we'll begin to get at some other issues with some of our students in the classroom.
And Delegate Jones, I understand those counselors now will be required to 80% of their time has to be done in counseling.
And that's correct. And to pick up on what Cliff was saying about the school safety initiative we had in the interim, we have $3 million a year in grants. We doubled the grants, school safety grants, to 6. The governor had gone from $100,000 per school division to $250, but did not increase the resources. So we doubled the resources, and we said 80% of the time. So if you combine that with the money for the raise, the money in lottery, we feel like we've positioned them very nicely to be able to not have to come up with so much additional dollars to be able to execute what they would like to at the at local level.
Now, what about additional training for school resource officers to sensitize them to the needs of students these days? Because students come to our public school institutions with a myriad of problems that didn't affect them 30, 40 years ago.
That's exactly right. I think we've had 2 or 3 bills on the floor, so they will be reconciled in conference. It's something that we all have acknowledged, and I think to Cliff's point, meeting in the interim with the school divisions, school boards, teachers, PTA, citizens in general, school administrations really helped guide us in our thinking and how we would approach the SRO, school security officers, etc. And so I'm pleased with the response that we've had collectively as a body. Republicans, Democrats, House, Senate, working together on this most important issue.
What about discussions around the physical security, the architecture of our public schools? Any discussions around that and the need to change things, perhaps?
Yeah, there's much discussion around that as well, on energy on the House side, the governor's bill, as well as the Senate side, to do what we can infrastructure-wise to invest as well. There's much need for, the surveillance and security systems that are allow us to be able to remotely manage what's going on throughout the campuses of our various schools, but also access to see who it is that's coming in and out of the schools. All of that is built into the infrastructure piece and our emphasis on making our schools much more safer.
And of course, we don't want our schools to be mini prisons,
No.
so to speak. And there's also the need, I take it, for training along the lines of lockdowns, for example, evacuations. What are we doing in that regard?
Well, we were surprised to find that not all jurisdictions do that. Suffolk, for example, is I met with them in the interim, with the police chief, sheriff, school superintendent. They coordinate, and fire, they coordinate and do drills, I think, a couple times a year. But not all jurisdictions do that. So there's some, language, I believe, to have them look at, doing having a coordinated drill for lockdown, etc. And they've even talked about an app where you can have an app where a teacher can say, "Hey, we have a active shooter, we have something going on at school," and they can then go and send it to 911. And then as a software, they can actually take over, and you can see in the school kind of what's going on. And then they can dispatch in a much more efficient way and manner to the school if their help is needed. And that was really forward thinking and technology that I had never seen before. I think we have money in the budget for that.
Yeah, yes, we do.
Now, I understand that there's been some concern expressed by parents about not being notified about these types of exercises because their kids come home and they're freaked out because they had a lockdown, that kind of thing. Any discussion around that issue at all?
Well, I think it's important to make sure that we stay in communication with our parents so that they realize what's going on at the schools. And through technology, I think we'll be able to better communicate with them. They'll have those options, just like with the apps that are available now for transporting the kids to school. I mean, parents now even have the ability via apps and some school divisions that invested through state funds to be able to monitor, a locator of where the bus is at a certain particular time, if it's on the way, if it's delayed, if it's picked the child up, when did it arrive to school, etc. So from the parents all the way to those managing our schools to the administration, we're getting better in place to be able to handle the needs. And Woody, that just leads me to something else. Sometimes folks point to the fact that government has mushroomed and grown, and why was the budget 20 years ago X number of dollars, and now today look at all of these funding, $21 billion in the available for appropriation from the general fund. Well, this is a different time. There are a lot of different needs, even as we've been talking and discussing educational needs that didn't exist before. So if you're talking about apps, you're talking about infrastructure for security in the schools, I mean, there are other requirements that go along with that, and it's an investment that we have to make.
I want to turn to taxes in a moment, but also want both of you to talk about, we'll start with you, about African American Cemetery initiative you have.
Well, we thought that was a wonderful thing that the Commonwealth has started as an initiative to look just a few years ago, an initiative to begin funding some of the African American cemeteries that may have started before 1900. And perhaps some of those cemeteries have fallen to disrepair with the graves, etc., that are there. And I think the Commonwealth has done a good thing in starting such an initiative. This year, African American Cemetery in the city of Suffolk Oak Lawn Cemetery has been, I guess, earmarked or something, an initiative in the form of a bill to fund some of the graves that are in disrepair there. And so when you talk about historically some of the people, well, anyone's grave should be sacred and handled in such a manner. But, excuse me, we have World War II, World War I, Tuskegee Airmen, all of which are part of that inventory of graves that are there at Oak Lawn Cemetery. And we're just happy to be able to sponsor that initiative, and Delegate Jones has co-sponsored. And so I believe even Saturday they have some kind of cleanup effort going prior to, I think this will start in new fiscal year. But it's an ongoing effort here on out to try to address the state of disrepair for many of those graves that are in those cemeteries.
Well, thank you for your support on that issue as well. Taxes. We can't end this interview without talking about taxes, because that's still a very fundamental issue. Tax conformity. Talk to us about where we are on that.
A couple things quickly. Our budgets are based on revenues we collect. Good news is the Senate and House versions aren't that far apart on resources. Senate and House version on tax plans are not that different as far as the amount of money that we'll look to send back to the to our constituents. Crossover happened 2 days ago. We're earnestly in discussions now as we speak on coming up with a plan for the taxes and for the conformity. And I'm very confident that with very soon you'll see something that will speak to all the above, a refund for some of the dollars that are paid additionally by Virginians because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act at the federal level. You'll see us more than likely do something with the standard deduction, increase that, and then try to look at a few other items that were limited by the actions at the federal level. It's, the governor had his idea, Senate had theirs, and we have ours, but I'm very confident we'll be able to, within the next handful of days, come to an agreement to be able to move that issue forward.
Now, where's Delegate Hugo's bill that would allow a Virginia taxpayer, even if he or she takes the standard deduction at the federal level, to itemize at the state level?
It is in the Senate, along with my conformity bill, which says we conform so you can start filing your taxes and get a refund back if you're doing just a normal standard deduction, etc. The Senate bill's over in Senate Finance, and so they'll probably be amended to reflect the other, or maybe we'll be able to get something done within the next week and just send an amended bill out to each floor that we've agreed upon. So that would be my hope.
So in the meantime, as a Virginia taxpayer, I just have to wait because I can't file my return yet.
But things are moving very quickly.
No, you can file your return. We just can't get a get a
refund.
refund. Okay, well, yeah, you can file your return.
File.
You can file.
Okay. Thank you both for being here, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Chris Jones and Delegate Cliff Hayes. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Charter Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.